You're firing me for helping a man who served our country? Emma's voice trembled as she clutched her final paycheck. Her gaze locked on Mr. Lewis's cold, unyielding expression. She was barely getting by, juggling 2 jobs, struggling to keep the lights on. But when she saw an elderly veteran at her register, his hands shaking as he counted his coins, she didn't hesitate. She used her own money to help him. And now, because of that one act of kindness, Mr. Lewis had fired her, enforcing store policy without a trace of compassion. What she didn't know was that someone else had been watching. Emma had always believed in doing what was right. But lately, right felt like a luxury she couldn't afford. Between working 2 jobs, caring for her sick mother, and barely making enough to cover rent, every day felt like a test she was barely passing. At 24, Emma's dreams had been put on hold, replaced by the reality of overdue bills and endless shifts. Her main job was at the grocery store on the corner of her neighborhood. It didn't pay much, but it was steady, and Emma clung to steady like a lifeline. She saw all types of people come through her line: parents stretching food stamps, kids spending allowance money, and elderly customers who looked more alone than anyone should. She couldn't help it. She cared, sometimes too much. But being a cashier didn't leave her many choices. One cold evening, as the store neared closing, an older man stepped up to her register. His clothes were worn, his back slightly hunched. Emma noticed the cap he wore, with a military emblem on the front, likely a veteran. She thought. His hands trembled as he placed a small assortment of items on the counter: bread, a few cans of soup, a small carton of milk. She watched as he pulled out a handful of coins, counting slowly, his face tightening with each count. Emma's heart sank as she realized he was short. She glanced around, hoping her manager wasn't nearby, and lowered her voice. "Sir, you're a bit short on the total," she said gently, not wanting to embarrass him. The man's face fell, and he began gathering his items, mumbling apologies, clearly ready to put something back. Emma felt a wave of empathy. Without thinking twice, she reached into her pocket, pulling out her last few dollars. "It's okay, sir. I'll cover it," she said with a smile, handing over the money to finish the transaction. The man looked at her, eyes wide, a mix of gratitude and surprise crossing his face. He thanked her, his voice shaking, and left with his groceries, clutching them tightly. Emma watched him go, feeling a quiet warmth in her heart. It was a small act, but one that felt right, until she saw her manager's stern face approaching. Emma's heart skipped as her manager, Mr. Lewis, walked over, his eyes sharp and unkind. She braced herself, hoping he hadn't seen, but his gaze told her he had. "Emma, what do you think you're doing?" he asked, his voice low but laced with anger. She swallowed, forcing herself to hold her ground. "He couldn't pay, and he's a veteran. It was just a few dollars. I didn't think it would be a problem." Mr. Lewis crossed his arms, unimpressed. "You didn't think? That's the issue here. We have rules for a reason. Giving away money from your own pocket doesn't change the fact that you're going against store policy." Emma felt a surge of frustration but kept her voice calm. "He served our country. He looked like he hadn't eaten a proper meal in days. I just wanted to help." But Mr. Lewis's expression remained hard. "We don't make exceptions for anyone, Emma, not even you. This is a business, and if you can't follow our policies, then you don't belong here." His words stung, but Emma couldn't bring herself to apologize for what she'd done. Helping people, especially those who were struggling, was important to her. She'd grown up watching her mother work too, sometimes 3 jobs just to keep food on the table, and every time she saw someone in need, it reminded her of those days. Mr. Lewis handed her an envelope. "Here's your final paycheck. We'll handle the paperwork from here." Emma's heart sank as she took the envelope, fired for doing the right thing. She felt her world tilt as she walked out of the store, clutching that small envelope. Outside, the winter air hit her hard. She had barely enough savings to last a month. And now, without this job, she wasn't sure how she'd manage. Emma trudged home, her mind reeling with questions, fears, and a tinge of regret. She had no idea what she'd tell her mother, who relied on her income to help pay for medication. Each step felt heavier, as if her world was closing in. As she reached her small apartment and unlocked the door, she felt a mix of sadness and anger. Her kindness had cost her, but she'd stand by her choice. She had done the right thing, even if the consequences were harsh. Little did she know, that simple act of kindness would set off a chain of events that would change everything. His words stung, but Emma couldn't bring herself to apologize for what she'd done. Helping people, especially those who were struggling, was important to her. She had grown up watching her mother work too, sometimes 3 jobs just to keep food on the table. And every time she saw someone in need, it reminded her of those days. Mr. Lewis handed her an envelope. "Here's your final paycheck. We'll handle the paperwork from here." Emma's heart sank as she took the envelope. Fired for doing the right thing. She felt her world tilt as she walked out of the store, clutching that small envelope. Outside, the winter air hit her hard. She had barely enough savings to last a month. And now, without this job, she wasn't sure how she'd manage. Emma trudged home, her mind reeling with questions, fears, and a tinge of regret. She had no idea what she'd tell her mother, who relied on her income to help pay for medication. Each step felt heavier, as if her world was closing in. As she reached her small apartment and unlocked the door, she felt a mix of sadness and anger. Her kindness had cost her, but she'd stand by her choice. She had done the right thing, even if the consequences were harsh. Little did she know, that simple act of kindness would set off a chain of events that would change everything. Days passed, each one blending into the next as Emma struggled to find a new job. She filled out applications, went to interviews, but nothing seemed to work out. The rejections weighed on her, each one a reminder of how much she needed this income. Her savings were dwindling, and with her mother's medical bills piling up, Emma felt the weight of her decision more than ever. One evening, while Emma was at home preparing a simple meal, there was a knock on her door. She wasn't expecting anyone, and for a moment, she hesitated. Slowly, she opened the door and found herself looking at a man she'd never seen before. Dressed in a dark suit, he held an envelope in his hand. "Are you Emma?" he asked, his voice calm but with a sense of urgency. Emma nodded, unsure of what to say. The man handed her the envelope. "This is for you," he said, then turned and left before she could ask any questions. Confused, she closed the door and looked down at the envelope in her hands. It was plain, with her name neatly written on the front. She hesitated, her heart pounding as she wondered who could have sent it. Slowly, she opened it, revealing a single letter inside. The handwriting was elegant, each word carefully pinned. "Emma," it began, "I saw what you did for the veteran at the grocery store. Acts of kindness like yours are rare, and they deserve to be rewarded. Enclosed, you will find a small token of appreciation. Use it to take care of yourself and those you love. Kindness has a way of coming back to us when we least expect it." Emma's hands trembled as she finished reading. Her fingers felt something else in the envelope. She reached in, pulling out a check for $10,000. Her breath caught as she stared at the amount, barely able to believe what she was seeing. Who was this stranger, and how had they known about her act of kindness? Questions raced through her mind. But one thing was clear. This wasn't just a coincidence. Someone had seen her when she thought no one was watching, and they had chosen to reach out in a way she could never have imagined. Sitting down, Emma felt a mixture of shock, gratitude, and disbelief. This money was more than she could have hoped for. It was enough to cover her bills, help her mother, and even give her a bit of security. She felt the relief wash over her, like a weight finally being lifted. But there was one thought she couldn't shake. Who had sent this? And why had they chosen her? Emma's life had taken a sudden, unexpected turn, and she knew this was only the beginning. The next morning, Emma woke up, still holding the check, half convinced it was a dream. But it was real, the money, the letter, the stranger. She knew this wasn't a gift to be taken lightly. Someone had gone out of their way to reward her kindness, and she was determined to make it count. Over the following weeks, Emma used the money carefully. She paid off her overdue bills, ensuring her mother's medication was stocked and her utilities stayed on. With some of the money, she was able to fix the leaky roof in their small apartment, finally creating a warm, comfortable home for her mother to rest. Emma also set aside a portion of the money for savings, something she had never been able to do before. Through it all, she carried the memory of the stranger's letter in her heart. Though she didn't know who they were, their words stayed with her, reminding her that kindness, no matter how small, could ripple outward in ways she'd never imagined. It gave her hope that, even in the darkest times, there were people in the world who believed in doing good simply for the sake of it. Emma's life wasn't magically perfect, but the act of kindness she had shown, and the kindness she had received in return, gave her the strength to move forward. It reminded her that even when the world felt heavy, small acts of compassion could make all the difference. Emma paid off the bills that had been weighing on her and set aside enough for her mother's medication. The relief was overwhelming, but with it came a growing sense of responsibility. She thought about the stranger's words, "Kindness has a way of coming back to us." Inspired by that letter, Emma found herself more drawn to helping others, even in small ways. She volunteered at a nearby shelter on weekends, offering a listening ear to people who reminded her of the veteran she had helped. She also took on a part-time job, just enough to keep her afloat without taking too much time away from caring for her mother and volunteering. One day, as she was finishing a shift at the shelter, an elderly woman approached her with a warm smile. "You're the girl who helped that veteran at the grocery store, aren't you?" the woman asked, her eyes twinkling with recognition. Emma was startled. "Yes, but how did you know?" The woman reached out, gently squeezing her hand. "You've touched more lives than you realize. Dear, that veteran you helped? He's my brother. He came home that night, talking about the young woman who treated him with such kindness when he had nothing left." Emma felt a rush of emotion as she listened to the woman's story. She hadn't expected that one small act could have meant so much. The woman continued, "My brother isn't well, and we've had a tough year. But you reminded him that there are still people who care." Tears filled Emma's eyes as the woman went on. "When I heard what happened to you at your job, I couldn't just sit by. I know it wasn't much, but I wanted to help in some way. You deserve so much more for what you did." Emma's mind reeled. This woman, she was the stranger who had sent her the check. The mysterious benefactor was standing right in front of her. She'd been there all along, connected by one small act of kindness that had sent ripples Emma hadn't even realized. I don't know how to thank you," Emma managed, her voice thick with gratitude. The woman smiled gently. "Just keep doing what you're doing, Emma. The world needs more people like you." As Emma walked home that night, she felt a renewed sense of purpose. The weight she had been carrying for so long felt lighter. She realized that her simple act of kindness had created a ripple, touching lives in ways she couldn't have imagined. And now, it had come full circle. With the financial help she received, Emma was able to support her mother's recovery and cover their living expenses. But more than the money, it was the connection, the reminder that people still cared. That kindness wasn't forgotten, that truly transformed her life. Emma continued volunteering at the shelter, dedicating her free time to helping others. She became known as the girl who would go out of her way to lend a hand or offer a comforting word. And every time she helped someone, she remembered the veteran and his sister, the strangers who had changed her life. Months later, Emma found herself in an interview for a new job. The interviewer, a middle-aged man with a warm smile, seemed genuinely interested in her story. He asked about her previous job, and Emma hesitated, not wanting to mention her firing. But then, she decided to be honest. She explained how she'd lost her job because she had helped someone in need, even when it went against the rules. She told him about the veteran, her struggles, and the unexpected kindness that had come her way. The man listened quietly, nodding as she finished. "Emma," he said, leaning forward, "I believe we need more people like you in this world, people who aren't afraid to do what's right, even when it's difficult. I think you'd be a perfect fit here." Emma left that interview with a new job offer, a position that paid well and came with the respect she had always deserved. Her life had taken a complete turn, all because of one small act of kindness. Standing outside, she looked up at the sky, feeling an overwhelming gratitude. That moment in the grocery store had set her on a path she hadn't foreseen. And now, She was living a life filled with purpose, connection, and hope.